Every morning, a scruffy homeless dog appeared at my doorstep, a single leaf clutched gently in his mouth. At first, I thought it was a quirky gesture, until the day I realized the heartbreaking truth behind his gift. The story begins in a quiet suburban neighborhood, where rows of houses line the streets, and the chirping of birds harmonized with the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze. It was a peaceful place, filled with the warmth of community and the familiarity of daily routines. Among the bustling lives of the people there, my own life was marked by a sense of monotony. I was a writer, working from home, often staring at a blank screen, waiting for inspiration to strike. My world was one of isolation, by choice or circumstance, I wasn't quite sure. Then he appeared, a scruffy brown dog, thin but not frail, with soulful eyes that seemed to hold the weight of countless untold stories. His fur was matted, a patchy coat that had clearly endured the roughness of a life on the streets. His tail wagged hesitantly, as if unsure whether he could trust the world or the people in it. He wasn't the kind of dog anyone would call cute or cuddly at first glance. But there was something about him, an air of determination mixed with a quiet plea for connection. The first time I noticed him, he was sitting at the edge of my driveway, his head cocked to one side as if observing me. I didn't think much of it. Stray dogs were not uncommon in the area, though this one seemed different. He didn't rummage through trash bins or scavenge for food like the others I'd seen. Instead, he just sat there, watching, as if waiting for something. The next morning, I found him closer, this time on my porch. Between his teeth was a small, dry leaf, the edges curled with age. He placed it carefully at the edge of my welcome mat and then backed away, sitting down again as if to observe my reaction. I chuckled at the oddity of it. A gift from a stray dog? It was amusing, yet oddly endearing. I waved at him, muttering something like, "Thanks, buddy," before heading back inside. But the pattern repeated. Every day, like clockwork, he would appear with a new leaf. Sometimes it was large, a vibrant green that seemed freshly plucked from a nearby tree. Other times, it was a tiny, brittle remnant of autumn, barely holding its shape. Each leaf was placed delicately on the mat before he retreated to his spot, his brown eyes fixed on me. I began to notice the details of his visits. He always came around sunrise, just as the first rays of light filtered through the trees. He never barked or growled, never showed signs of aggression or impatience. His demeanor was calm, almost solemn, and yet there was a flicker of hope in his eyes every time he looked at me. Over time, I couldn't help but feel a sense of curiosity. Why was he doing this? Was it a game? A sign of gratitude? Or was it something else entirely? I started leaving out small bowls of water and bits of food on a porch, hoping to offer him something in return for his peculiar gifts. At first, he hesitated, sniffing the offerings cautiously before taking a bite or a sip. Slowly, a bond began to form, though it was a quiet one, built on unspoken trust rather than grand gestures. The neighborhood itself added to the backdrop of this growing connection. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, yet no one seemed to know anything about this dog. I asked a few neighbors if they'd seen him around or if he might belong to someone. The answers were always the same: never seen him before. He's probably just a stray. Poor thing must be lost. Despite his seemingly homeless state, there was an air of purpose to him, as if he wasn't wandering aimlessly, but had a destination in mind, a reason for his actions. His persistence fascinated me. I started keeping the leaves he brought, storing them in a small box on my desk. Each one felt like a piece of a puzzle I was yet to solve. As days turned into weeks, the routine became a comforting constant in my life. My mornings revolved around his arrival, the soft thud of his paws on the porch, the gentle drop of a leaf, and the expectant gaze that followed. In a way, he became my muse, breaking through the creative block that had plagued me for months. But beneath the joy of our growing bond, a question lingered. Why leaves? Why me? And most importantly, what was he trying to tell me? Little did I know, the answers to these questions would soon unravel in a way I could never have imagined. The dog wasn't just bringing me leaves, he was bringing me a story, one that would change both of our lives forever. The dog's daily visits continued, and the leaves kept coming. Each morning, like clockwork, he would arrive, tail wagging gently, leaf clutched delicately in his mouth. It was endearing, yes, but it also became a growing mystery. Why was this stray dog bringing me leaves? Was it a form of gratitude for the food and water I provided, or was there a deeper meaning? I couldn't ignore the curiosity building within me. Every time I picked up one of his gifts, I examined it carefully. The leaves were never random, they seemed deliberate. Some were vibrant and fresh, as if he'd chosen them carefully from a nearby tree. Others were weathered and old, their veins intricate and fragile, as if they held a story of their own. But why? What could he possibly be trying to communicate? I began asking around the neighborhood. While I had already inquired about whether anyone owned the dog this time, I wanted to know if anyone had noticed his peculiar behavior. Did he bring leaves to other people as well? Was this a pattern, or was it unique to me? The responses were unanimous. No one else had experienced anything like it. The dog, it seemed, had chosen me for reasons only he understood. As much as I appreciated the gesture, the mystery started to weigh on me. Every leaf felt like a puzzle piece, but I couldn't see the bigger picture. It was frustrating, but it also sparked something within me, a need to understand not just the dog's actions but his life. Where did he come from? How long had he been on the streets? And most importantly, why did he keep coming back to me? One day, I decided to follow him. After he delivered his usual morning leaf and ate the food I left out, he turned and trotted off down the street. Grabbing my jacket, I hurried after him, keeping a safe distance so as not to alarm him. He moved with purpose, his paws patting softly against the pavement, occasionally stopping to sniff a tree or glance back as if to ensure I wasn't too far behind. He led me through the neighborhood and into a nearby wooded area. The further we went, the quieter the world became. The hum of cars and distant chatter of people faded, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the chirping of birds. The dog moved with an uncanny familiarity, weaving through the trees as if he'd walked this path countless times before. Eventually, we reached a small clearing. In the center was an old, weathered tree with a hollow at its base. The dog approached it, his movements careful and deliberate. He nosed around the hollow for a moment before pulling out a small, tattered blanket. My breath caught as I realized what I was seeing. This wasn't just a random spot in the woods. It was his home. The blanket, though dirty and worn, was neatly arranged as if he'd tried to make it comfortable. Around it were a few scattered items, a chewed-up tennis ball, a rusted can that might have once held food, and a small pile of leaves. My heart ached at the sight. This dog, with his scruffy coat and soulful eyes, had been surviving out here on his own, creating a semblance of a home with whatever he could find. As I stood there, trying to process what I was seeing, he turned to me, leaf in mouth, and placed it at my feet. This time, the gesture felt different. It wasn't just a gift, it was a message. He was showing me his world, his life, and in doing so, he was asking for help. I knelt down, tears stinging my eyes as I gently stroked his fur. "I see you now," I whispered. "I understand." But understanding didn't make the situation any easier. How long had he been living like this? How had he survived the cold nights and harsh weather? And what could I do to help him? The weight of his circumstances pressed heavily on me, but so did the determination to make a difference. I returned home that day with more questions than answers. The dog followed me back, his trust in me seemingly solidified by my willingness to see his world. I began researching shelters and rescue organizations, trying to find a solution that would ensure his safety and well-being. But the more I looked, the more complicated things seemed. Shelters were overcrowded, and many stray dogs were never adopted. The thought of him ending up in a cold, lonely kennel broke my heart. At the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that his connection to me was more than chance. He had chosen me, sought me out, and trusted me enough to share his secret. I couldn't turn my back on him now, not when he had already endured so much. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty and a growing sense of urgency. Every morning, he brought me another leaf, and every evening, I sat at my desk, staring at the pile of leaves I had collected, feeling the weight of their unspoken message. The dog had become more than just a visitor. He was a part of my life now, and I had to find a way to help him. But how? How could I bridge the gap between his world and mine, ensuring he got the care and love he deserved without uprooting the fragile bond we had built? The answers weren't clear, but one thing was certain. The journey we had started together was far from over. The pivotal moment came one cold and rainy evening. I had been going about my day, preparing a warm spot on my porch for the dog with an old blanket and a bowl of food, when he didn't show up at his usual time. Every day like clockwork, he had arrived without fail, leaf in mouth and wagging tail. But today, the hours ticked by, and there was no sign of him. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he had found a different route or stopped somewhere along the way. But as the night wore on and the rain fell heavier, worry gnawed at my insides. Something wasn't right. He wasn't just late, he was missing. I grabbed my coat, a flashlight, and an umbrella and ventured into the wet, chilly night. The streets were slick with rain, and the cold wind bit at my face, but I didn't care. I had to find him. This dog, who had chosen me for reasons I still didn't fully understand, had become more than just a stray in my life. He was a part of me now, and the thought of something happening to him filled me with dread. I retraced the route he usually took to my house, calling out softly into the night. "Where are you, buddy?" "It's me." "I'm here." My voice echoed through the empty streets, met only by the sound of rain pattering against the pavement. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating corners and alleyways, but there was no sign of him. As I reached the edge of the wooded area where he had shown me his makeshift home, my heart sank. The ground was muddy, the trees swaying ominously in the wind. I knew it was a long shot, but I had to check. I made my way into the woods, my shoes sinking into the soft earth with each step. The darkness was thick, and the rain made it difficult to see, but I pressed on, fueled by a mix of fear and determination. When I finally reached the clearing, the sight that greeted me was heart-wrenching. There he was, curled up by the old tree, his fur soaked and matted from the rain. He looked weak, his usual vibrant energy replaced by a feeble whimper. My chest tightened as I rushed to his side, dropping the umbrella and flashlight in my haste. "Hey, buddy," I said, my voice trembling as I knelt beside him. "What happened? Are you hurt?" He opened his eyes weakly, his tail wagging ever so slightly at the sound of my voice. That small gesture nearly broke me. Even in his vulnerable state, he was happy to see me. I quickly checked him over, running my hands gently over his body to feel for any signs of injury. There was a nasty scrape on one of his legs, and his body felt alarmingly cold. I wrapped him in my coat, carefully lifting his trembling form into my arms. He was lighter than I expected, his frame bony beneath his wet fur. "Don't worry," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I've got you. You're going to be okay." The journey back to my house felt like an eternity. The rain continued to pour, and the weight of him in my arms was a constant reminder of the urgency of the situation. When I finally got home, I dried him off as best as I could and wrapped him in a warm blanket. He shivered, his breath shallow and uneven, and I knew I couldn't handle this on my own. I called the nearest emergency vet clinic, explaining the situation as quickly as I could. They told me to bring him in immediately, so I gently placed him in my car and drove through the rain-soaked streets. The ride felt surreal, the windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the downpour as I glanced back at him in the rearview mirror, silently willing him to hold on. At the clinic, the staff moved quickly. They took him from my arms and rushed him into an examination room, leaving me standing in the waiting area, soaked and shivering but too consumed with worry to care. The minutes dragged on, each one heavier than the last. Every time the door to the exam room opened, I looked up, hoping for news, but none came. Finally, a veterinarian emerged, her expression calm but serious. "He's stable for now," she said, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. He was severely dehydrated, and the scrape on his leg was infected. We've cleaned the wound and started him on fluids, but he's still very weak. He'll need to stay here for a couple of days so we can monitor him. I nodded, tears brimming in my eyes. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Over the next few days, I visited him at the clinic as often as I could. Each time I saw him, he seemed a little stronger, his tail wagging a bit more enthusiastically, and his eyes shining with more life. The staff told me he was recovering well, but it was clear he would need ongoing care and a safe place to live once he was discharged. When the day finally came for him to leave the clinic, I knew what I had to do. I had been considering it ever since I brought him in, and now there was no doubt in my mind. This dog, who had brought me leaves and shared his world with me, had chosen me, and I was choosing him in return. I filled out the adoption paperwork that same day, officially making him a part of my family. As we left the clinic together, his tail wagging and his eyes full of trust, I felt a sense of fulfillment I hadn't known before. He had come into my life unexpectedly, bringing with him mystery and heartache, but also love and purpose. At home, I prepared a cozy spot for him near the window, complete with a soft bed and his favorite treats. He settled in quickly, his tail thumping against the floor as he looked at me with those soulful eyes that seemed to say, Thank you. And as I sat beside him, stroking his fur and watching the rain fall outside, I realized just how much he had changed my life. What had started as a mystery, a stray dog bringing me leaves, had become a story of connection, trust, and second chances. He wasn't just a dog anymore. He was family. And I knew without a doubt that we had saved each other in ways neither of us could have imagined. With the dog now a permanent part of my life, things began to settle into a new rhythm. I named him Rusty because of the reddish-brown hue of his fur, which glowed warmly in the sunlight as if it held a secret of its own. He seemed to thrive in his new environment, his energy returning as he explored the house and yard with an unquenchable curiosity. But even as we settled into this newfound peace, the mystery of the leaves lingered in the back of my mind. Rusty continued to bring me leaves. Now that he was no longer a stray, his insistence on this ritual was even more curious. Every morning, as I sat with my coffee on the porch, he would trot over, leaf carefully held in his mouth, and drop it at my feet. It wasn't the same urgency or desperation I had sensed before, but rather a quiet persistence, as though he wanted me to understand something deeper. One day, curiosity finally got the better of me. I decided to follow Rusty when he ventured out into the yard. His behavior intrigued me. There was an almost ritualistic quality to the way he sniffed out the perfect leaf, examined it closely, and then brought it back to me. I watched from a distance as he roamed the garden, his nose to the ground, tail wagging with determination. He eventually stopped under an old oak tree, nudging a particularly large leaf with his nose before picking it up gently in his mouth. He turned and looked at me as if to say, "This one." I crouched down as he approached, taking the leaf from him and examining it closely. It looked ordinary, just another fallen leaf, but the act itself carried a weight I couldn't explain. "What is it, Rusty?" I asked, half expecting an answer, even though I knew better. He barked once, wagging his tail, and then bounded off again, his energy infectious. I decided to indulge this strange habit of his further, hoping it might reveal more about his past or his reasons. Over the next few days, I began collecting the leaves he brought me, storing them in a small box by the window. Each one was different, some crisp and golden, others green and veined like tiny maps of the earth. Together, they painted a picture of the seasons, a mosaic of nature's quiet beauty. But Rusty wasn't just a dog who brought me leaves. He was a dog who had stories to tell, even if he couldn't speak. As the weeks passed, I started taking him on walks around the neighborhood, letting him guide the way. He seemed to know exactly where he wanted to go, often pulling me towards certain streets or stopping in front of particular houses. I began to wonder if these places held significance for him, memories of his time as a stray, perhaps. One afternoon, while we were walking through a park, Rusty suddenly froze. His ears perked up, and his body tensed as he stared intently at a figure in the distance. It was a woman sitting on a bench, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked up as we approached, her expression softening as her eyes met Rusty's. "Rusty," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I was taken aback. "You know him?" The woman nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. She explained that she had been caring for Rusty during his time on the streets, leaving food and water out for him, and even trying to take him in. But Rusty, ever the free spirit, had always wandered off before she could fully earn his trust. She had lost track of him months ago and had assumed the worst. "He used to bring me leaves," she said, smiling through her tears. "Every time I left food for him, he'd leave a leaf by my door, like he was saying thank you." It all clicked in that moment. Rusty's ritual of bringing leaves wasn't just a random habit. It was his way of showing gratitude. It was how he connected with the people who cared for him, a small but meaningful gesture that spoke volumes about his loyal and giving nature. The woman, whose name was Margaret, was overjoyed to see Rusty again. She pet him lovingly, and Rusty, in turn, licked her hand, his tail wagging furiously. She told me stories of the time she had seen him wandering the park, always with a leaf in his mouth, as though he were on a mission. I invited Margaret to visit Rusty at my home, and over the next few weeks, she became a regular presence in our lives. She and Rusty shared a bond that was impossible to ignore, and I could see how much joy it brought her to be reunited with him. Rusty, too, seemed happier, his tail wagging a little faster whenever she was around. As the pieces of Rusty's story fell into place, I couldn't help but marvel at the resilience of this little dog. Despite the hardships he had faced, he had never lost his ability to give, to show kindness and gratitude in the simplest yet most profound way. The leaves he brought me were more than just leaves. They were tokens of trust, a bridge between his past and the life he had now. But the falling action of our story wasn't just about understanding Rusty's past. It was also about building a future. With Margaret's encouragement, I began volunteering at a local animal shelter, sharing Rusty's story with others and helping to care for dogs who were still waiting for their own happy endings. Rusty often came with me, his presence a source of comfort for the other animals and a reminder of what was possible with a little love and patience. The leaves, too, became a symbol of something larger. Inspired by Rusty's habit, I started incorporating them into my daily life in small but meaningful ways. I pressed them into journals, used them to decorate my home, and even shared them with friends, explaining their significance. Each leaf was a reminder of Rusty's journey and the quiet power of gratitude, a lesson I carried with me everywhere I went. Through it all, Rusty remained the heart of our little family, his energy and spirit a constant source of joy. He no longer had to bring me leaves to show his gratitude, but he still did, and every time he dropped one at my feet, it felt like a gift, a reminder of how far we had come together. The falling action of our story wasn't about endings. It was about beginnings. Rusty's journey had brought us both to a place of understanding, connection, and purpose. And as I looked at the growing collection of leaves by my window, I knew that each one was a piece of a story still being written, a story of love, trust, and the quiet beauty of second chances. Just when it seemed like life with Rusty had finally settled into a peaceful rhythm, an unexpected conflict emerged, threatening to undo everything we had built together. It started subtly, barely noticeable shifts in Rusty's behavior. The happy, carefree dog who once bounded around the yard and greeted everyone with wagging tails and bright eyes began to act differently. At first, I chalked it up to the cold weather or a random mood, but soon the signs became too prominent to ignore. Rusty started retreating into himself. He no longer brought me leaves every morning. Instead, he seemed distant, often staring out the window as if he were waiting for something or someone. His energy diminished, and his once hearty appetite dwindled. He would sit by the door, his ears perked up at every faint sound outside, as though anticipating a visitor who never arrived. My heart ached as I watched Rusty slip into this uncharacteristic state. This wasn't the vibrant dog I had come to love and care for. Something was clearly troubling him, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Determined to get to the root of the issue, I began observing him more closely, hoping to catch a clue in his behavior. Then, one afternoon, the mystery deepened. Rusty became unusually agitated during our usual walk around the neighborhood. He tugged at the leash with uncharacteristic force, pulling me toward a street we didn't normally visit. His pace quickened, his ears alert, and his nose sniffing furiously at the ground as though following a scent trail. We came to a stop in front of an old, abandoned house at the end of the block. Rusty froze, his entire body tense as he stared at the crumbling structure. His tail wagged slightly, but it wasn't the joyful wag I was used to. It was a nervous, almost hesitant movement. His eyes were fixed on the house, and he let out a low whine that sent chills down my spine. Something about that house unsettled me, too. It had an eerie, forgotten look, with its overgrown yard and broken windows. Yet Rusty's reaction suggested that it held some kind of significance to him. I tried coaxing him away, but he refused to budge. It was clear that this place, for reasons I couldn't yet understand, was important to him. The next day, Rusty's behavior grew even more erratic. He paced restlessly around the house, his eyes darting toward the door every time a sound echoed outside. He refused to eat and spent hours lying near the window, his gaze fixed on the street. I began to wonder if this was connected to his past. Was there someone he used to know, a former owner, perhaps, who lived in that abandoned house? Feeling helpless, I reached out to Margaret, the kind woman who had cared for Rusty when he was astray. She had become a close friend over the past few months and understood Rusty's quirks better than anyone. When I described his behavior and the abandoned house, Margaret's expression grew serious. That house, she began, her voice trailing off as she thought. I remember seeing Rusty around there a lot before you found him. He always seemed to linger near it, but I never understood why. Maybe it holds a memory for him, something he hasn't been able to let go of. Margaret's words planted a seed of curiosity and concern. I decided to visit the house again, this time without Rusty. I wanted to see if there was anything there, any clue that might explain his attachment to the place. The house was even more foreboding up close. The air around it felt heavy, as if it carried the weight of forgotten stories and abandoned lives. I carefully approached the front door, which hung slightly ajar, creaking with every gust of wind. Stepping inside, I was met with a sense of stillness that was almost deafening. Dust coated every surface, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling like delicate curtains. As I explored the rooms, I noticed signs that someone had once cared deeply for this home. Faded photographs lined the walls, and a weathered dog bed sat in the corner of what seemed to have been a living room. My heart skipped a beat when I spotted a small bowl near the bed, engraved with the name Rusty. It was as though the pieces of a puzzle were slowly falling into place. This house had once been Rusty's home. But what had happened here? Why had it been abandoned, and why had Rusty ended up on the streets? I shared my discovery with Margaret, who helped me piece together a possible explanation. She recalled hearing rumors about the house's previous owner, a kind elderly man who had passed away several years ago. Without family to take over the property, the house had been left to decay, and Rusty had been left to fend for himself. Armed with this new understanding, I realized why Rusty had been acting out. Seeing the house again must have triggered memories of his old life, the love he once had and the loss that followed. It was a reminder of the past he couldn't forget, no matter how much time had passed. But this realization brought new challenges. How could I help Rusty move forward? How could I reassure him that he was safe and loved in his new life? The resurgence of this conflict tested our bond in ways I hadn't anticipated. Rusty's restlessness and sadness mirrored my own frustration at being unable to ease his pain. But it also deepened my resolve to be there for him, no matter what. Over the next few weeks, I focused on helping Rusty heal. I began incorporating elements of his past into his new life, bringing him back to the abandoned house occasionally so he could explore it at his own pace. Each visit seemed to bring him a little more closure. He would sniff around the rooms, linger by the dog bed, and then look at me as if to say, "I'm ready to go now." At home, I created a space for Rusty that felt familiar yet new. I found a dog bed similar to the one in the abandoned house and placed it in the corner of the living room. I even filled a bowl with his name on it, just like the one I had found. Slowly but surely, Rusty began to come out of his shell again. One day, as I sat on the porch with my coffee, Rusty trotted over with a leaf in his mouth. It was the first time in weeks that he had brought me one, and my heart swelled with emotion. He dropped it at my feet and looked up at me with those warm, trusting eyes that had drawn me to him in the first place. The conflict had resurfaced and tested our bond, but it had also brought us closer. Rusty's journey wasn't just about survival. It was about resilience, love, and the quiet power of healing. And as I held that leaf in my hand, I knew we had turned a corner. The past would always be a part of Rusty's story, but it didn't define him. Together, we had found a way to move forward, one leaf at a time. The road to healing was neither quick nor simple, but the breakthrough moment came on an ordinary morning. I woke up to the sound of Rusty scratching at the door, his usual sign that he was ready for our daily walk. This time, however, there was a lightness in his steps that had been missing for weeks. His tail wagged with steady rhythm, his ears perked up at the sound of chirping birds, and his eyes held a spark of joy that I hadn't seen in what felt like an eternity. This moment marked the beginning of Rusty's recovery and the resolution of the challenges we had faced together. The shadows of his past still lingered, but they no longer dictated his every move. Rusty had found a way to reconcile his old life with his new one, and in doing so, he taught me invaluable lessons about patience, understanding, and resilience. It wasn't just about moving on from the memories tied to the abandoned house. It was about integrating those memories into a new chapter of life. I realized that Rusty didn't need to forget his past to be happy. He needed to know that it was okay to carry it with him. And so I made it my mission to ensure that he felt safe and loved, no matter what. Our walks became a ritual of exploration and bonding. Rusty still occasionally led me to the abandoned house, but his demeanor changed with each visit. Instead of approaching it with hesitation or sadness, he began to explore it with curiosity. He sniffed around the overgrown yard, barked playfully at birds, and even lay down in his old spot by the doorway, as if reclaiming it as a place of peace rather than loss. One day, I decided to bring something special with us, a bouquet of wildflowers. I placed them in a small vase and set it inside the house near the faded photographs that still hung on the walls. It felt like a gesture of gratitude to the man who had once cared for Rusty and a way to honor the bond they had shared. Rusty seemed to understand the sentiment. He sat beside me, his tail wagging softly, as we both took a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought us here. Back at home, I noticed that Rusty's energy and enthusiasm continued to grow. He began playing with his toys again, chasing after balls with the exuberance of a puppy. He greeted visitors with his signature friendly demeanor, and his appetite returned in full force. It was as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, allowing him to fully embrace the love and stability of his new life. The small gestures we incorporated into our routine made a significant difference. I found myself paying closer attention to the things that brought Rusty joy, whether it was a particular toy, a cozy spot by the window, or the simple act of sitting together on the porch. I even started collecting leaves during our walks, creating a little pile in the backyard for Rusty to explore and play with. It was a small way of honoring the unique bond we had formed and the journey that had brought us together. The resolution of Rusty's struggles also brought about a profound change in me. I began to see the world through his eyes, appreciating the small, beautiful moments that often go unnoticed in the hustle of daily life. Rusty's resilience reminded me of the importance of staying present, of finding joy in the little things, and of extending compassion to those who carry unseen burdens. One particularly heartwarming moment came when Rusty surprised me with a gesture that perfectly encapsulated his healing journey. On a crisp autumn morning, as we walked through the park, Rusty dashed ahead and returned with something in his mouth. At first, I thought it was another leaf, but as he dropped it at my feet, I realized it was a small, perfectly smooth stone. It was as if Rusty was telling me that he had moved on from the leaves, symbols of the past, and was now ready to embrace something new. The stone became a keepsake, a reminder of the progress we had made together and the unbreakable bond we had forged. The transformation in Rusty didn't go unnoticed by others. Margaret, who had been such a supportive presence throughout our journey, visited one afternoon and marveled at the change in him. "He's like a completely different dog," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. "You've given him a second chance at life, and he's thriving because of it." But the truth was, Rusty had given me just as much as I had given him. He had taught me about unconditional love, patience, and the incredible capacity for growth and healing. In caring for him, I had found a sense of purpose and fulfillment that I hadn't known I needed. As the days turned into weeks and then months, Rusty and I settled into a routine that felt like home. The abandoned house became less of a focal point and more of a distant memory, a chapter in our story that had shaped us but no longer defined us. Rusty still carried the experiences of his past, but they had become a part of him in a way that enriched his present rather than hindering it. The resolution of our journey culminated in a moment of quiet reflection one evening as we sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Rusty lay beside me, his head resting on my lap, his eyes half closed in contentment. I ran my fingers through his fur, marveling at the trust and love that had grown between us. In that moment, I realized that our story wasn't just about a homeless dog finding a home. It was about two souls coming together to heal and grow. Rusty had taught me that even in the face of hardship, there is always hope. And I had shown him that love and stability could be found, even after loss. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, I whispered a quiet promise to Rusty. "No matter what, I'll always be here for you." He responded with a gentle nuzzle, a silent affirmation of the bond we shared. The resolution of our story wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning. It marked the start of a new chapter filled with love, joy, and the unshakable knowledge that we had overcome every challenge together. Rusty had found his forever home, and I had found a companion who had forever changed my life. And so, as I tucked the smooth stone into my pocket, a token of our journey, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the twists and turns that had brought Rusty into my life. Together, we had weathered the storms of the past and emerged stronger, ready to face whatever the future held. And for that, I would always be thankful. As I sit here reflecting on everything Rusty and I have been through, I can't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. What began as an ordinary walk in the park led to an extraordinary story of love, healing, and resilience. Rusty wasn't just a dog who entered my life. He was a symbol of everything I didn't know I needed, a companion, a teacher, and above all, a friend. From the very first moment he brought me that crumpled leaf, Rusty had something profound to teach me. At the time, I didn't realize it. How could I? His eyes, filled with quiet desperation and hope, told a story I couldn't fully understand until we embarked on this journey together. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, it became clear that Rusty wasn't just asking for help, he was offering something in return. When I look back, it's astonishing to see how much we've grown together. Rusty, once a scrappy and seemingly hopeless stray, is now a vibrant, playful dog who brings joy to everyone he meets. His transformation wasn't just physical, it was emotional and spiritual. He went from a life defined by loss and uncertainty to one filled with love, warmth, and security. But Rusty's journey isn't just his own, it's ours. Caring for him has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. He's taught me lessons I never expected to learn from a dog, lessons about patience, resilience, and the power of unconditional love. Through Rusty, I've discovered the beauty of slowing down, appreciating the little moments, and finding joy in the simplest of things. One of the most heartwarming realizations I've had is how much Rusty has impacted not just me, but everyone around us. From neighbors who smile at his wagging tail to children who giggle as he playfully chases after them, Rusty has become a beacon of positivity. Even Margaret, who once worried about his troubled past, now marvels at how far he's come. "He's a different dog," she often says, her voice tinged with admiration. "And it's all because of you." But the truth is, I'm not the hero of this story. Rusty is. Despite everything he endured, he chose to trust again. He chose to love again. And in doing so, he showed me the true meaning of resilience. As I share this story with you, I hope it serves as a reminder of the incredible bonds we can form with animals and the profound ways they can change our lives. Rusty's story isn't unique. There are countless other animals out there waiting for a second chance, waiting for someone to see beyond their scars and into their hearts. If there's one thing I've learned from this journey, it's that love has the power to transform. Rusty didn't just find a home, he found a family. And in him, I found a purpose, a reason to keep going, to keep giving, and to keep believing in the goodness of the world. I often wonder what would have happened if I hadn't stopped that day, if I hadn't picked up the leaf Rusty brought me. Would someone else have come along to help him? Would he still be wandering the streets, searching for kindness that might never come? I'll never know the answers to those questions, but what I do know is that I'm grateful for the choice I made. That one small decision to stop, to care, to help, changed everything. And that's the message I want to leave you with today. It doesn't take much to make a difference. Sometimes all it takes is a moment of kindness, a willingness to see beyond the surface, and a little bit of faith in the power of love. Rusty's story is proof that even in the darkest times, there's always hope. It's a reminder that second chances aren't just for animals, they're for all of us. Whether it's a stray dog, a struggling friend, or even ourselves, we all deserve the opportunity to heal, to grow, and to find happiness. As I sit here, watching Rusty snooze peacefully by the fire, I feel an overwhelming sense of peace. Our journey hasn't been easy, but it's been worth every moment. The memories we've created, the bond we've formed, and the love we've shared are things I'll cherish forever. But our story doesn't end here. It's just the beginning. Every day with Rusty is a new adventure, a new opportunity to create moments of joy and connection. And as we move forward together, I know there are countless more memories waiting to be made. So to anyone reading this, I have one simple request. Take a chance. Whether it's opening your heart to an animal in need, reaching out to someone who's struggling, or pursuing a dream you've been putting off, don't let fear hold you back. You never know what incredible things might happen when you take that first step. Rusty's story is a testament to the power of love, kindness, and resilience. It's a story that reminds us of the beauty of second chances and the incredible impact we can have on each other's lives. And it's a story that I hope inspires you to make a difference, no matter how small. As we close this chapter, I want to thank you for taking the time to hear Rusty's story. It's a tale that's close to my heart, and sharing it with you means more than words can express. If this story has touched you in any way, I encourage you to share it with others. Together, we can spread a message of hope, compassion, and love. And finally, if you're looking for more stories like this one, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these incredible tales of resilience and hope. Hit the subscribe button and join us on this journey of celebrating the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. Thank you for being a part of our story. Rusty and I are forever grateful.